When real men can't sleep, real men do the news. So let's do the news. The other day, I think it was 2 days ago, I had the opportunity. Well, I was at a doctor's appointment, and as I'm there, the TV is on in the background, and CNN is on. And CNN is hitting various stories that I myself have covered. And I'm watching the stories, It hits the story of Hong Kong, and it is so lacking. I turn to the nurse that's beside me, and I say, hey, do you see that story there about Hong Kong? I say, I bet you that they don't mention this, this, and this. And they don't mention it. But interestingly to note, they show an image that is out of tune with what they're saying, and they don't explain the image, nor do they even go into potentialities behind the image. I'm going to explain what I mean. Mainstream media is comically bad at their job, especially when there is an American perspective in the mix, and we tend to stick our nose into some of everything. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, you find yourself coming back here often, please like this video, share this video only if you like the video. And definitely, of course, it goes without saying, subscribe. We're growing the channel. You allowed me to do this particular channel, and I appreciate you for allowing me to do it. It wasn't this story that brought me back here, but this story was already queued up. So I got to do this story before I get to the next story. So let's make this succinct. And I hated the way CNN covered this story. Hated it. So I am going to cover this story again. Almost in just exasperation at the coverage of this. This is a Hong Kong police station on fire. The thing that represents law and order, literally the figurative embodiment of law and order in Hong Kong, set ablaze. Can you imagine that happening in the United States? I can't. Hong Kong, at least technically by definition, is Chinese territory. Hong Kong used to be Chinese territory before the Brits took it, if I'm not mistaken, because they were pissed off that China didn't like them forcing opium onto their soil. Without getting into right, wrong, sides, and all this other stuff, that stuff makes it murky. Just in a technical sense, China looks at Hong Kong as its territory. Personally, I look at it and say, after a period of time, when a thing becomes somewhat distinct in and of itself, and it's pushing for independence, I think that call for independence needed to be given a fair hearing. That's where I'm at. I would say that pretty much for any organized body that is consistent in its wants. But the United States wouldn't accept that. If Texas said we're just going to cede from the Union, you think the United States would be perfectly okay with Texas doing so? And if there was a foreign actor working to make that so, potentially, do you think the U.S. will stand for it? I'm telling you, they would not. Here's an interesting thing that you may not have known. When the Soviet Union rolled into Afghanistan, the world turned and pointed their finger at the Soviet Union and said, oh, look at you, look at what you're doing. You're horrible, horrible people. You're invading that country. What is less known is that the United States was working in clandestine operations in Afghanistan that provoked a Soviet response. That's less known, meaning they didn't roll in for shits and giggles. They rolled in because they believed that there was foreign powers intervening into what they considered to be their affairs. They were embroiled into essentially their own Vietnam. That was considered a policy win with the exception of 9/11. My point is this. Countries intervene in other countries' affairs, and oftentimes if they can get away with doing it in a clandestine way with a larger public is not entirely aware of it, they will do just that. Especially with the United States and the CIA operations or NGOs that essentially have taken the place in many respects of things that the CIA used to do. With the trade war taking place between China, with this kind of back and forth, do you honestly believe that the United States is entirely out of this process? And if you do believe that, why do you believe that? If you were watching CNN, you would get the impression that the United States has nothing to do with this at all, and that Donald Trump is absent, and the world is looking for his guidance and his leadership, and the U.S. has nothing to do with this process, and Hong Kong is falling apart. You know what they don't show you? Paris. They don't show you Paris in flames week after week after week after week after week. Cops beating and shooting people. Why not? That's an editorial decision that they don't show you what is taking place in France. But they're going to beam this big time. Media tends to go in line with governmental wants, especially on issues of foreign policy. If the Trump administration is having an issue with China, then the media is going to have issue with China. It doesn't matter how much they dislike Trump. The same thing is true here. The propaganda model. This is in flames. This gets worse. Take a look at this. This is the airport where the protesters
and departures was
changed tactics and literally filled up an airport. One of these guards shot someone in the face. Right here, literally. They attacked that guard, beat the living daylights out that guard. As you see afterwards, he's like out of it. But the entire airport was full, jam-packed. Completely jam-packed. This guy was considered to be a Chinese spy, and so they tied him up and then beat the living daylights out of him. Pandemonium. Out of control. The clip that I thought was entirely and utterly ludicrous, that they passed over in the media without a word on.
So that journals and textbooks became increasingly difficult to find.
Battery 40%.
What's this?
Connected to Galaxy
Damn it.
S8. Battery 40%.
That's so bizarre.
Galaxy
What's this? That's not America. That's Hong Kong. That's Hong Kong. Protesters in Hong Kong are raising the American flag and singing the Star-Spangled Banner. Mainstream media looked at this picture and just passed over this picture and didn't say anything about the picture, and went on saying Donald Trump has nothing to do with this process. We're missing his leadership. I thought that was extraordinary. Don't you have to explain why the protesters are carrying the American flag and singing the American anthem? Here's another picture that you would never see on mainstream media. This. China posted this. That woman is a U.S. diplomat. That U.S. diplomat is interacting with the leaders of the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. Now again, take out right, wrong, take out sides, take out what you think is right, what you think should happen. Take all that stuff out. I don't really care about this stuff right now because that stuff clouds it. I'm getting more into action consequence and more cause and effect. I think that's give you more of a better telling of things sometimes. And in this case, that's exactly what it is, because it's essentially history playing out. Thanks, Britain. Once again, mainstream media will never show you this picture. This is a U.S. diplomat interacting with essentially the pro-democracy group that has been helping spur on these protests. After this meeting, tactics changed. They took down an airport. They took down an airport. And yeah, that's valid. Now, all of it wasn't valid, so don't misunderstand me, but taking down an airport essentially shut down traffic and brought Hong Kong to a standstill. Now, if you were trying to advise somebody in how to get your point across, doing a street protest is one thing. Bringing Hong Kong to a halt by taking down an airport is something else. Tactics change after that meeting. Mainstream media says Donald Trump has nothing to do with this process. They are literally holding the Star-Spangled Banner. Now, one or two things are true. They're doing that in order to entice help from America, but they don't need to entice help from America, but they already have a diplomat that they're already talking to, meaning the connection between those things has already been made. Are they getting resources? Are they getting assistance, logistics? Are they getting advice on how to make this campaign stick that much more in China's craw? The connections is made. The notion that Donald Trump is checked out of this process seems to be somewhat nonsense. He may not say anything openly, but clearly a backdoor conduit has been created between the United States and the pro-democracy groups on the ground. My point is he has not checked out the process. And even though media is continuously telling you so, he is not checked out of the process. That's not, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying the way they're reporting this is missing things, is missing key things. China comes out and says this. And by the way, do you believe that the United States wouldn't run clandestine operations in Hong Kong? And I'll tell you something else that I've said on multiple occasions. The moment that a large number of people get together and make demands, they feel themselves, and those demands escalate. Meaning, what starts off as we don't want a bill that allows being shipped over to China will eventually become we want independence. It has to go there. Otherwise, none of this makes sense. And 50 years from the date that Britain handed them back over like they were a piece of meat, they're supposed to be handed back over to China. And this two systems policy is supposed to break down. If they're flipping out like this over handing that over, what are they going to do as the time limit ticks down? The only thing that makes sense in this context is independence. The catch is, do you have enough people to make that work? And not just that, will China let you go? With America? With America? You must understand, from China's perspective, this is deeply embarrassing. It's a stain. It's a memory of when China was not in a situation where it could defend itself from Western aggressors. A never again thing is in effect from the standpoint of a cultural thing, from the standpoint of China. My point is, that is a cultural stain for them. However, from the standpoint of the United States, it's a win-win regardless of what happens. If China uses military force in the same way that Russia used military force when it went into Afghanistan, the world will sit back and the world will point and it will say, how dare you, look at that totalitarian regime, go after those protesters that just want freedom and democracy. How dare you, sir? How dare you? Keep in mind, the objective for the last administrations, particularly this one, has been to curb the influence of China, and that will be done by hook or by crook. It is not just competing from a standpoint of economies. It is also to make their lives miserable for as long as they are challenging the crown. If China invades Hong Kong, which they've been threatening to do, building troops up on the border, the world will turn and point, and it will be somewhat of a catastrophe from the standpoint of optics. If they don't, and this chaos continues, the same thing is true. The United States will turn and say, we support the democracy, we support the people who want democracy and freedom and liberation for the people of Hong Kong, and they would point at China and say that totalitarian regime is threatening those people who just want peace and freedom. It's gross politics, it's cynical, but it is, I suspect, more true than not. This is China. This is the UK's Chinese ambassador to the UK. I'm going to show you two clips of him. This is the first one. Let me give you the first one.
Stop conniving in violent offenses. They should not misjudge the situation and go down the wrong path. Stop interfering in China's internal affairs. Stop conniving in violent offenses. They should not misjudge the situation and go down the wrong path. Otherwise, they will lift the stone only to drop it on their own feet.
I want to show one more clip from this gentleman right here. Come on, come on, come on, come on. You can do it. You can do it. Maybe you can't do it. Come on, come on. And by the way, Trump says if China wants a trade deal, it must first work humanely with Hong Kong. What does a trade deal have to do with Hong Kong? It has to do with it trying to make them look bad. And again, taking right, wrong, all this other stuff out. My personal
Never
opinion
allow
is
anyone
liberation.
undermine one country, two systems. Should the situation in Hong Kong deteriorate further into unrest uncontrollable for the government of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, the central government would not sit on its hands and watch. We have enough solutions and enough power within the limit of basic law to quell any unrest swiftly.
Now, part of there's a few things that are true. We don't know the extent of U.S. influence, meaning we don't know what the U.S. We don't know what the conduit is. We don't know how much influence and what has been offered. It just seems like the connection has been made. And so if that connection has been made and we know that the United States has an interest in trying to, let's say, ding China and take the polish off, this is a way to do it. In the same way the U.S. was willing to do it with Russia. In the same way CIA and NGOs were willing to do it in Latin American countries. This is just a perpetuation of previous policy. But I hope you understand it, though. What's important here is, whatever is true, China is saying, you are intervening into our affairs. Stop. And not just you're intervening into our affairs. Regardless of how much intervention into the affairs the United States is involved in this case, they are using that as a pretext. Pretext for what, you might add? The Chinese army released this video. Yeah, street fighting. Like on the streets of Hong Kong. That is literally a threat to, we will come in here and we will restore order if the government of Hong Kong can't. Again, I keep saying this is a national embarrassment. These guys are flipping out with this notion of being a part of China as if they're embarrassed to be a part of China, if that makes sense. Whether that's, from China's perspective, that's somewhat of an eyesore. Not to mention the two systems thing gets across this notion that at one point they weren't able to defend themselves. It's a big deal for them. And it's a cultural sore. This is a major threat. We will restore order. That threat goes further. Where is it? Where is it? Troops on the border. Right here. These are troops assembling on the border of Hong Kong. The People's Armed Police have been assembling in Shenzhen, a city bordering Hong Kong, in advance of an apparent large-scale exercises. Now, question is, are they bluffing? Do you believe they're bluffing? I suppose we're going to find out. Whatever is true in this case, it does seem like some back channel has been reached with the protesters from the standpoint of the U.S. Either CIA, either some kind of NGO, but that woman is a U.S. diplomat, so I would imagine us, U.S., some kind of intelligence back channel. And in the same way, we've been screaming about Russia and the non-hack that was supposedly taking place and the hysterics that are taking place with the Democratic Party. Why don't you believe they won't act in kind for something that is a cultural sore spot? I haven't gotten into right and wrong. That doesn't necessarily apply. I'm getting more so into the way states engage with one another and this notion of gamesmanship and brinksmanship. I'm saying the U.S. seems to be intervening into the affairs of Hong Kong. The U.S. has nothing to do with Hong Kong. Now, you could say that you want to support the pro-democracy forces, fair enough, and this is why this notion of right, wrong, all this other stuff kind of goes out the window. Look, my own personal opinion is Hong Kong at this point is something distinct. It's something distinct. And if there's something distinct, and if there's enough of them that says, yes, we want independence, then I am all on board this independence train. My issue with taking that particular perspective, though, is that there are some people that take that perspective not because of the independent stuff, but more because of the notion of digging China. That's my issue with taking that particular perspective. That's the thing that bothers me. The problem is, what am I supposed to do? Say that a group of people who've become somewhat distinct in and of themselves based on the interesting history of their particular country should not get self-determination? Even if that self-determination dings China in this case? I don't like this neocon disposition where the goal of this is to injure China. By the same token, I'm stuck with the situation of saying, if they are distinct and they want to be distinct, should they not get the opportunity to be so? And am I really going to say, no, you can't be a distinct thing because there are elements in the United States that just have a hawkish foreign policy that are looking to take the polish off of you by any way necessary, by hook or by crook, even if it's something like Taiwan, or even if it's something culturally sensitive like this? Thanks, Britain. Thanks a lot, Britain. Thanks a lot. Hong Kong people are now using Pepe as a symbol for freedom. Look, I'm telling you, what is going to take place, I don't know how long, but they are going to start calling for independence. And whatever they were talking to from the standpoint of those people in the United States, that U.S. diplomat that is probably working to help with resources and whatnot in the back channel and giving them logistics and opinion and so forth. Independence is probably the touchstone. These things evolve. They really do. They never stay what they initially start off as. Like the Russian Revolution didn't start off as a revolution in the sense of this kind of grand taking out the Tsar thing. It started off as for bread. They were just hungry. If I'm not mistaken, it started off as women marching. France, even recent, that started off as a fuel tax. These things evolve. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. God, no. Hong Kong is like a Nat bank than a government. A Nat bank. Well, so that's the interesting part, right? And I didn't really get into that part, but do you know what you're asking for? Like, China is expecting in 40-something years for this two-system stuff to break down. Hong Kong is reacting like this for a bill to send people over to the mainland. The U.S., and I would imagine elements of the West, is probably taking this opportunity to stick it to China using this very sensitive point. And people said earlier, there probably been, these type of NGOs there in perpetuity for the longest time. But sparks, man, touchstones. Things don't necessarily happen in and of themselves. It often takes some environmental influence. Port Film Co-op. China killed 40 million last century. Same regime. Wow. I guess the question is, Port Film, is that threat real? Is this are they threatening another Tiananmen Square? I don't know. I don't know. I would tell you this. The United States doesn't care one way or the other. It doesn't care. The objective of the United States, it doesn't care. It doesn't fit into the objective. The objective is not freedom and democracy. The objective is to ding China. I hope you understand that. There's a difference in those things. Insofar as those kind of allegiances coincide, the U.S. will stay there. It's kind of like in the Middle East with the Kurds. I guess my point is this. Whatever China does, if it's an overreaction, we're going to wag our finger. Even if the advice that's given is given with the notion of provoking an overreaction, we're going to wag our finger. Just like now, we're wagging our finger. But that's the entire point. That's the entire point. Take the ding off of China. Particularly if you could pierce Hong Kong away. Meaning, if you can embroil this kind of, this thing where you get their military to have some kind of outsized influence in Hong Kong, or for that matter, you have this kind of independence movement. And by the way, an outsized influence, meaning an overreaction by China, could literally provoke an independence movement. This is fascinating politics. Up to this point, China has been using kind of financial means, like sanctions and so forth. Like people potentially losing their jobs if they protest, that type of stuff. But those are threats. The question becomes, are those threats real? So we'll see, Port Film. I'll leave it there. Like and share.